Morning in Edo does not snap awake. It dissolves the night like ink in water. First, a sumi-gray breath along the sumida. Then a soft widening pearl. Then a thin wash of gold that finds the city's wooden ribs and warms them without hurry. Shoji screens turn from dark squares to milk-white panes. The room learns to see itself. You wake to the polite creak of bamboo in the eaves and the faintest cluck from an iron kettle testing its readiness. Tatami answers your first shift with a dry, grassy whispertha, sound of straw, remembering the fields it once belonged to. The air has last night's cool stored in corners. The paper door keeps it from boasting. Lift the futon's edge, fold once, then again. Cloth learns its shape and holds it the way good habits do. Outside the screen, the world is already arranging itself without noise. A well rope turns and gives a soft groan. A bucket lifts, water shouldering water until stillness returns. A tofu seller moves down the lane with a wooden yoke, balanced like a sentence that knows where to end. His call is low and even more suggestion than song. Somewhere a broom sprinkles water over Dastuchimizuan. The street accepts the blessing, darkening by a shade, cooling by a breath. Sprinkled water and straw broom bristles make a hush together that could teach the heart a gentler beat. You slide the shoshi a hand's width. Dawn breathes in. The lane is a narrow ribbon with edges brushed by potted pines and buckets turned mouth down to dry. Over the roofs, a slice of the sumida pretends to be sky. A pole boat drifts with the current as if being read by it. A heron reshapes the air with 2 deliberate strokes and then decides to hold still on one leg, as if reconsidering the problem of balance. Far off, a Sosis's bell throws a single bronze note into the light. The note lands without echo and becomes part of the morning's grammar. You pour water from the kettle into a small pot of rice left to soak before sleep. The sound is clean and unambitious. Steam rises like a polite ghost and forgets to haunt. Miso waits in a cup, dark and quiet. You loosen it with a little ladle of heat, and the room collects the scent-fermented comfort, wood smoke, the idea of salt. A slice of daikon listens in the pot and nods toward tenderness. Tea leaves sit in a wrapped tin like a promise you don't need to cash yet. Shoji light is not like sun on stone. It filters, it edits, it chooses. It paints the rim of a bowl, then a brush stand, then the knot in a beam that looks like an eye, deciding to remain closed. Your hands move in slow. Accurate lines lift the pot, set the lid ajar, rinse the lacquered bowls, turn the chopsticks so their lacquer won't argue with steam. Each gesture ends where it should, and nowhere louder. From the river comes a barge's wooden cough. From Nihonbashi, early footsteps on plansketta that have not yet found their busy rhythm. A fishmonger passes at a distance, carrying the sea folded into straw crates. He doesn't call. The streets will have voices later. For now, Edo is a house, waking room by room. You sit facing the screen so the light can draw on your face, as if it were clean paper. The first bowl of rice is not sweet or salty. It is right. A chopstick's touch of pickled plum convinces the mouth that morning has a plot. Miso follows. Quiet thunder in a wooden bowl. You save a sliver of tofu for a neighbor who will knock weather first, then news, then breakfast if your tray says yes. In this city, trays learn to speak. Across the lane, someone slides a boltwood on wood, a syllable for opening. A brush grinder turns his stone with the steady patience of ink, learning to be water that learned to be ink again. Two apprentices run by holding a length of paper between them like an unfurled cloud. They do not let it touch the ground. Their teacher follows at a walking pace that is somehow fast enough. "Corners," he says, and the boys remember to lift them. The room keeps its own breath. Rice, steam, tatami straw, cedar from the shelf, where bowls rest like moons tucked into their phases. On the beam, a small paper charm folded and tidrameans the house to keep accidents interested in other streets. You touch it once, the way you touch the shoulder of a friend who is already calm. The charm remains itself. Calm remains in the room. Beyond the screen, shopfront shutters begin to think about rising. A tea house opens one eye. Broom, water, threshold, lantern. A lantern's paper drinks the light, then returns it warmer. Someone trims a wick with the seriousness of a monk turning a page. A dog of uncertain ambition chooses a patch of sun and elevates it by sleeping in it. In a window, a single persimmon left to dry blushes deeper. Sweetness is an occupation that requires stillness. You wash the bowls in a basin that holds a piece of dawn inside it. Water scarves around lacquer and leaves no argument behind. The towel course and cleaning races drops without reminding the wood of its sins. Put each bowl back with a sound small enough that it could be mistaken for thought. The chopsticks lie parallel, as if practicing silence. You lift the shoji a little more, and the city answers with another layer. A vendor's bamboo flute testing two notes. The snap of a line as laundry acquires a sky. The stiff, agreeable cluck of a wooden lock deciding to be unlocked. Somewhere, a temple rooster announces himself as if hired for it. No one sues. The sun touches the ridge of a tile roof and draws a gold edge that travels, traveling no faster than a person could walk. This is the speed of belonging. You fold the futon further back to make more floor for later. A brush waits on its rest. A strip of paper waits for a list that you will not write all at once. The list will be modest. Carry a tray to the neighbor. Fetch paper from the shop where paper smells like forests, making peace with cities. Remember to return a borrowed ladle, heavier with shine than with pride. The day prefers chores that end in kindness. Before the leaving, you bow to the room by habit rather than rule. The bow is short, the way good sentences are. The kettle lowers its voice. The miso pot settles without protest. On the sill, you leave 2 sips of cool water in a sake cup for whoever comes winged and thirsty. A sparrow arrives in the middle of the decision to arrive and drinks, as if it were its idea all along. You approve the story. Outside, the lane has acquired shadows where people will step and sunlight where nobody should rush. You slide the shoshi closed until only a thumb of light remains between worlds. The paper brightens, the wood frame ends with its own calm brown. You adjust the tie of your sleeve. The knot accepts instruction without debate. Slide the shoshi just wide enough for your body to pass and for the room to keep its calm. Inside, the air is cool and honest, the kind of cool that wood remembers overnight and returns slowly. Tatami gives under your heel with a dry whisper. Straw has a way of forgiving footsteps. The walls hold their pale earth tone like a vow. A single beam carries a knot that looks like an eye choosing to stay closed. Nothing here hurries you. The room invites the day to begin with small, correct motions. By the window sits the hibachi lacquered rim, ceramic bowl keeping. Yesterday's ash like a story, left at a comma. You nest to charcoal sticks in the gray, add a sliver of pine, and offer a breath that is more suggestion than command. Ember wakes, cautious and orange. Smoke finds the opening in the shochi and forgets to be smoke. The kettle black iron, round as a moon that trusts itself, takes its place above the glow. As metal warms, it begins to speak in syllables. First a thought, then a murmur, then the faintest silver thread of steam. You set the ingawatha narrow wooden varan to order with a tenagui in your hand and the habit in your wrist. Wipe once along the rail, once across the sill. Dust agrees to leave without drama. A pair of geta waits with their straps even, toes turned toward the lane. The little bucket for uchimizu keeps its place by the door. Later, water will meet dust and make the street polite. Back inside, you turn to the alcove, the tokonoma. The scroll you hung last night, a single character, brushed by someone who knows when to stop, holds the wall as if it were supporting it. Below, a chabana flower sits in a bamboo tube, not showy, only accurate to the season. You trim its stem the width of a fingernail, tilt the water a touch, and the arrangement exhales. Scroll, flower, emptiness, the room's three-part chord, on a low shelf. Bowls nest inside one another like moons in different phases. Red lacquer with a worn lip where hands prefer to hold it. A humble stoneware cup glazed in the color of distant rain. A small plate mended with a seam of gold where it once failed and was taught how not to. The seam is not a scar. It is an answer. You lift each piece, wipe it with a square of soft paper, and put it back a hair more true. Order here is not stern. It is kind. The rice jar ceramic stout lives near the wall that remembers winter best. You slide its lid and listen to the small porcelain click that says enough. Inside, a bamboo scoop waits like a patient bird. You think of midday and measure without counting. A handful for work, a half for courtesy, a half for your neighbor whose knock always carries weather and wisdom in equal parts. The scoop returns to its roost. The lid returns to its line. Next, cloth. The futon you folded at dawn becomes tighter, neater, as if the cotton were glad to be trained. You smooth a crease with your palm. The crease listens and obeys. Zabuton cushions align themselves like for quiet friends around the low table. A Firo shekaplum colored square waits to be a lunch bundle later. For now, it is a folded promise. You tug one corner and it falls sharper, pleased to be seen correctly. The kettle clears its throat. You lift the lid. Patience is the first drink. You turn to the small water jar, the mizusashi break, the surface with a ladle, and set the ladle across the rim so the bamboo handle can decide which side of the day it prefers. These gestures have no audience. They keep the room's spine straight. You sweep the tatami with a palm broom whose bristles remember grass. The sweep is forward, then side, then toward the door, three movements that end in a neat triangle of dust you deliver to the threshold. Outside, a pinch of water teaches the triangle manners. It dissolves and becomes elsewhere. You draw the broom across its handle with a thumb to remove what clung. Tools like to be finished with. On the work mat by the window, you lay out the day's errands in the currency of objects. The borrowed wooden ladle, now polished a shade brighter than when it arrived. A small packet of ink for the brush grinder, 2 streets away. A folded list you will never have to open because your hand remembers its weight more than your eyes remember its words. The Soraban abacus rests nearby, beads centered, a quiet machine that keeps numbers from arguing. Warmth moves from hibachi to fingers. You take up the tea tin. It clicks, a small, polite sound. Leaves inside smell of mountain shade and sun caught, then tamed. You measure a pinch, the size of a patient coin, into the pot. Wait for the water to understand itself, and pour. The first drop darkens the clay. The second pulls aroma forward, green, bitter, kind. You do not rush infusion. Time is an ingredient. Pour, turn, lift. The cup warms your palms and asks your shoulders to stop pretending to be ears. First sip, a lesson. Second sip, acceptance. You set the cup near the edge of the table where light can visit it. The ring it leaves will evaporate evidence that even good moments prefer to be remembered by their effects rather than their stains. Close by, a lacquer box keeps pickles tidy-diken with a memory of salt. Cucumber taught to be bright. A slice of ginger that thinks it is wiser than it is and succeeds. You choose 2 pieces, set them like punctuation next to a thumb of rice you saved from breakfast. The mouth appreciates these commas. The stomach nods. You eat slowly enough to notice that the kettle's voice has settled, that the hibachi glows with the confidence of a job understood. A paper repair waits 1 square of shoji that learned the wind too closely last week. You spread starch with a brush that believes in thin coats. Lay the new paper over the lattice and smooth bubbles outward with the back of your fingernails. The sound is barely sound, a cloth whisper. You press the corners, lift your hands, and the patch holds. Repairs like this teach the room to trust you. You open the chest where working clothes rest, indigo cotton, sleeves tied short with a cord. A sash that knows your waist better than you do on certain days. You fold yesterday's robe tighter, shake out today's with a flick that corrects the back seam without scolding it. Cloth size. You slip the cord into your sleeve for later. Knots enjoy being anticipated. Someone knocks, not urgent, to knuckles, friendly. You slide the shoji, the width of a greeting. The neighbor stands with the news of clouds and a question about whether the river's mood is honest. You answer with the tray you keep for this exact moment, a cup still warm, to pickles. The smallest square of rice. He bows as if to a stage. You bow as if to a friend. Words are few. The tea does most of the talking, and when talking ends, the cup says the last line by being empty at exactly the right time. When he leaves, you straighten the getter by the door, because the day likes beginnings to look ready for returns. The hibachi's ash settles by a finger's breadth. You stir the coals to give them air, and they thank you with a brighter red. The kettle lid tilts a touch to keep the water patient. You tie the furoshiki around the small lunch rice. Pickles, a sliver of dried mackerel. Humility and test the knot that opens with a single confession. Before you step out, you visit the tokonoma once more. The scroll has not moved. Its stillness has the flower has shifted by the thickness of thirst. You add a spoon of water, enough to be noticed only by the stem. The floor under your palm is cool, then warmer where sun found it and decided to rest. You bow not deep, just true. Shoji closes behind you with the soft shur of paper, finding wood finding quiet. On the engawa, you slip into get a left, then right so the day will not think you are trying to trick it with haste. The tenugui goes over your shoulder. The abacus stays. Numbers can wait. The list stays folded. Memory can walk. At the threshold, you practice the house S1 law. Step out only after you have left it better than you found it. Kettle aligned. Hibachi safe. Cloths folded. tools finished, flour watered, scroll unbothered, tray ready, sandals straight. You look once, from sill to tokonoma, the way a calligrapher looks from first stroke to last. The line holds. Begin with the rice that stayed warm under cloth, because midday likes to stand on something steady. You fan it once with the lid to let the extra breath go, then sprinkle a palm of sesame and a whisper of salt. Your hands learn the temperature, then shape 3 triangles as if folding gentle instructions into them, one for you, one for the errand that will take longer than it says, one to give away without deciding to whom yet. A strip of nori waits on a lacquer tray. You press it to each onigiri, and its size as sea meets grain. Miso keeps company on the side, thickened this time with a few coins of daikon, a sliver of tofu that knows how to be helpful, a thread of green onion. The lid sets back on the pot with a soft wooden toque, and the room understands lunch is becoming true. You open the window, a hand's width. Ito answers with food the way rivers answer with light. From the lane, a vendor of tamagoyaki turns his rolled eggs on a copper pan. The spatula makes a neat tapfold, and a ribbon of steam carries a perfume of sweet soy and patient heat. Farther off, oil speaks in a hush as tempura meets it and leaves crisp fish small enough to eat whole, a leaf of shiso that learned to be lace. Someone carries bowls of soba past your door, broth brushing rims, scallions floating like little boats that don't mind arriving last. The tofu seller's yoke returns, buckets swinging like punctuation. You trade a coin for a square that trembles with dignity. Half becomes cubes in the miso, half waits under a cloth with a pinch of grated ginger and a shy dimple of soy cold, clean, a pause you can eat. The soy comes from a shop that smells of cedar and salt. Casks line the back like short, serious monks. When the lid is lifted for your bottle, the aroma deep browned patience steps forward and bows. You set a tiny dish of pickles cucumber, quick bright, plum with a stubborn heart, burdock that remembers soilin, the place on the tray where your left hand expects comfort. A few roasted barley grains scatter onto the cloth. They make no mess, only a sound like soft rain when you gather them. Outside, Nihonbashi is waking to its restless kindness. You carry your furoshiki bundle past shops taking down their shutters, past a brazier where sweet potatoes rest in ashakimo that will later sing their winter song, Ishi-Yaki-Imo-O. Today the voice is practiced, quiet. You nod to it as to a friend rehearsing. At the bridge, steam rises from a soba stall in pale banners. You stand in the curl of warmth long enough to taste with your nose buckwheat, bonito, the honest salt that tells truth and then stops. A clerk in a blue coat slurps without shame. The sound is not rude here. It is gratitude with air. You consider a bowl and decide to borrow the smell instead, saving your hunger for what your hands already prepared. Desire that can wait keeps its edge kind. Beside the fishmongers, Ito's bay glitters in crates. A man lifts a knife thinner than a whisper and teaches a sardine to be tidy in 3 strokes. Another tends eel over a charcoal grate, kabayaki sauce, brushing and returning, until the surface gleams like a promise kept. You count the coins in your sleeve with your fingers and keep them. Wanting is not the same as needing. The smell is enough to carry home and use later as seasoning for thought. A boy offers dango on skewers 3 pale dumplings with a glaze the color of late afternoon. He turns them in a small brazier so the rice cakes pick up freckles. The syrups, sweet and soy, thickens into a sheen that catches light. You buy 1 skewer and ask for an extra breath of hot tea from the kettle at his side. He pours into a chipped cup that has learned to be generous. Steam writes the briefest letter to your face and disappears. The first bite gives, then resists, then agrees. You eat slowly because time is an ingredient. Farther down, a man in a headcloth shapes rice with a speed that never looks hurried nigirizushi that belong to this river. Tuna, bright as lacquer, kohata, with its clean silver logic, a nori-washed shrimp that tastes like tide and sun. He brushes each piece with soy that has learned restraint. You watch as if at a shrine and let watching be your meal here. Sometimes the eyes do the eating and leave the stomach grateful anyway. Home invites you to finish the ceremony in correct quiet. The onigiri find their places on the tray, joined by the tofu under its gingery cloud and the small bowls that clink like friends with good manners. You seat yourself so the light paints one edge of the rice and leaves the other soft. Bite, sip, bite, grain, sea, warmth, broth, salt, green. The rhythm makes shoulders slacken in a way no argument ever could. You set 1 triangle of rice on a small plate for the neighbor who will knock with the weather, and carry the spare in your sleeve when you step out again an edible kindness looking for its mouth. On the sill, a plum candy waits in its paper amber, translucent, a held sun. You promise it to the late afternoon, that hour when work loosens and sweetness behaves like permission. In the alley, a yatai pushes past with a bell no bigger than a thimble. The ring finds your ear and leaves it cleaner. A chestnut roaster turns his drum karakoro, and smoke with sugar in it, writes a note you file under evening, maybe. The rice triangle in your sleeve finds its person before the end of the block. An apprentice carrying a stack of paper above his head like a cloud that must not fall. You match his pace for 3 steps and lift the onigiri where his mouth can find it without the paper losing face. He bows with his eyes the safest way while carrying sky. Back at the room, you rinse the lacquer bowls in a basin that holds a coin of daylight. The water leaves without insisting on attention. The furoshiki dries on the Engawa rail, square and satisfied after a job done well. You tap the edge of the miso lid to remind the pot to rest, and it answers by fitting more snugly. For dessert, you practice humility. 2 slices of Yokonazuki sweet collapsed into firmness set on a plate repaired with gold. The tea is greener than morning now. Cooler water, shorter, steep. You let the sweet meet the bitter and notice how they argue politely and then agree to be friends. Your mouth feels wiser for having listened. Before you fold the tray, a swallow lands, considers the cup you keep for wings, and drinks the last sip as if it had ordered it. You accept the bill with pleasure. Work begins where hands remember before the head does. You set the Suzuri inkstone in the mat and tilt the water jar just enough to place a moon-thin pool in the shallow. The stick of sumi turns in your fingers, then circles on stone. It does not scrape, it murmurs. Black blooms slowly, a lake teaching itself depth. You breathe to the pace of the circle-long in, patient out until the ink stands with the body of tea and the shine of discipline. Paper waits wrapped, the way good things wait. washi with its own breath, fibers long as kind thoughts. You lay 2 sheets under a cloth so they will wake to the room's moisture and not surprise you by drinking too fast. A brush lifts from its rest, belly springy, tip decisive. The first line you make is not a word, it is a test of intention. The bristles gather, glide, and leave a black that dries to velvet. You are satisfied without saying it. The brush returns to its cradle and remembers the shape of stillness. A block of cherry wood sits under cloth on the low bench. The wood is tight-grained, cooperative. The knife has been honest with it before. You raise the cloth and feel the cool, and all sets the Kenta registration marks to neat corners that will later tell paper where to sit and color where to return. Knives talk differently from brushes. Their language is subtraction. You pull a fine asuki to open a hairline. You follow with a wider hanjito to persuade the lines to become corridors. Curl by curl, the wood learns to step back so ink may step forward. The bench receives the shavings with the courtesy of a host who knows how to make crumbs look tidy. You stop before you are tired. Sharpness and fatigue are poor neighbors. The stone that loves steel waits at your elbow. You wet it, and the blade travels, quiet, drawing a ribbon of water that smells faintly of iron and rain. When the edge says enough, you listen. Tools are teachers that speak softly. By mid-morning, you carry the block wrapped again, not for secrecy, but for timidity's sake through lanes that smell of straw, soy, and river. You pass Nihonbashi, the bridge that counts the country. Porters move like punctuation across its plank schema, comma, long dash, pause. Kurame's storehouses breathe rice and paper. The river sends boats with bundles that look like sleeping children, washi rolls, lumber, straw mats, cargo wrapped in furoshiki knots that can be taught in 2 minutes and remembered for years. At the dyers, the vats are alive. Indigo is not a color at first. It is a conversation between ferment and air. Tsukamotha compostedly rests in the pit with wood, ash, lye, sake, a little wheat bran, the quiet encouragement of yesterday's success. A deep blue flower froths on the surface, a shy ring that means the vat is in a good mood. The dyer bows to the vat as one bows to an elder with opinions. Cotton goes in the color of pale tea and rises the color of green cedar. Air kisses it, and blue appears like a decision. Dip, press, lift, air. Dip, press, lift, air. The cloth darkens with patience. You touch nothing. You watch the blue climb and think about edges on wood and edges in cloth that agree on what steady means. Back at the printer's corner, paper meets block. The Kyogotha key block rests, true, pinned by 2 pegs that know their job without boasting. You lay the sheet, feel the Kento kiss alignments, and offer pressure with the baren lacquered disc, coiled cord belly. It hums faintly as it travels round heat in the palm, motion in the shoulder, breath in the ribs. When you lift the sheet, lines stand where you asked them to, thin and sure as a promise kept. You place it aside on the drying rack, cover it with a leaf of interleaving, and begin again. The room smells of damp paper, cherry wood, ink, 3 kinds of quiet. Color blocks arrive like polite relatives, one for gray water, one for the blue of a sleeve, one for the faint plum you will only know is there when it isn't. The boy at your elbow carries pigment ground with Nikawa glue, each in its shell dish, Bangara red that behaves like warm brick, orpiments cautious yellow you will use sparingly, dayflower blue that understands sky. He weights the brushes, pats them against his palm to teach them moderation, and lays color into the shallow trays. Your baren travels, your breath keeps meter. The print grows as if it were remembering itself. You pause to mend the baren's skin, a sheet of bamboo sheath, tightened and tied, with a knot that releases when asked and never before. The circle under your hand becomes responsive, again, an instrument tuned. Across the bench, another printer hums through his teeth without sound, the way men who are well matched with their work often do. When the run is stacked a modest pile, not greedy you, wipe the block with a damp cloth and lay it face down to rest. Wood loves even its naps. You sweep the shavings into a tidy pile and carry them to the brazier. Tomorrow's tea will thank you for the small, quick heat. You visit the carpenter's alley because wood has more than one future. Saws sing there, but backwards. The pull stroke cuts, the push returns for the next truth. A man with shoulders like well-placed beams pulls a canna plane. The shaving it produces is a ribbon you can read through. He curls it on his palm like a pet. Joinery happens with a discretion that nails would ruin. Mortise welcoming tenon, a whisper of rice glue, a mallet tap that barely deserves the word tap. Two boards become one plane with no visible marriage. You admire what you will not buy and carry the lesson. Instead, join what you can without adding trouble. At the paper shop, the papermaker shows you what you already know and can't resist relearning. Kozo fibers beaten to kindness. A vat with mucilage that makes water remember how to hold things. A Tsukita screen lifted with rhythm. Dip, tilt, settle, layer. Light finds the sheet before the sun does. Each sheet lays on the board, and a brush's quick kiss makes them agree to be neighbors until they are dry enough to be themselves. You buy a small stack, and the shopkeeper slides a slip of oil paper between every dozen, the way a mother slips thought between chores. Midday arrives as if someone set it down gently on the workbench. You open your furoshiki and let rice and pickles and fish meet air. The apprentice who steadied your pigment bowls receives the spare onigiri you shaped this morning. He tries to bow, sitting down, and succeeds at neither bow nor sitting, which is charming. You talk about nothing. Whether the new batch of sumi is moodier than the last, whether the dyer is secretly training a vat to be bluer than blue, whether the river is taller today by the width of a boat plank. Talking is rest that leaves the hands ready to begin again. Afternoon chooses finishings. You burnish the print's sky with an empty block to make clouds glow without ink. You press mica into a sleeve so it will answer lamplight with a small, honorable glint. You test a gradient bokashi by laying color heavier than lighter with a damp brush and find the exact place where water should stop and pigment should begin. The sheet dries with a barely audible question. Am I done? You decide yes and place it in the pile, where done is allowed to mean done for now. On the way out, you pass the kite maker's stall. Bamboo ribs, thin as sentences. Paper skins painted with carp, who believe in upstream faces, who prefer laughter. Kanji that declare nothing necessary and therefore everything true. A breeze lifts a fringe. You adjust one stick without thinking, and the maker nods at your hand, seeing woodlore on your fingers. You have enough coin to buy one and enough sense to wait. Desire saved is wind saved. The street returns you to the river's thoughtfulness. A boatman sands his, or where the water chews it. The sound is a long, narrow, husheth, ocean's cousin. A vendor sprinkles water in front of his door, and the ground accepts the calm. Above, laundry uses sunlight as a kind of brush. Sleeves rise into shape, then fall back into cloth. Somewhere a bell keeps the hour by deciding not to ring again. At home you set the day down in the language of putting away, knives wrapped in oiled paper. The block sleeps under cloth. The prints stand in a rack like thin doors, half open to the same scene. You rinse the brushes until the water runs shy. Repoint the tips against your thumb and lay them in a row that pleases the eye. The inkstone you wash last and least. A ghost of black remains. Ghosts are useful in the morning. You look at your hands, a smudge along the first knuckle, a faint line on the pad of the thumb where wood tested you and approved. They are not tired, they are ready to be still. You set the kettle on the hibachi with a single, sensible aim, to quiet the room with steam. The first breath rises, thin as thread, and stitches the afternoon to the evening. The market does not crash open. It arranges itself like chess pieces that already know the game. You step under the arcade by Nihonbashi, where shade stacks neatly, and the flagstones remember 100 careful mornings. Wooden shutters lift and settle with a dry SHRRP. Signs tilt to the street the way faces tilt to conversation. The river runs its quiet commentary under the bridge. Above, the city answers in measured syllables ladle, bell, sandal, brush. Weights and measures introduce themselves first. At a rice stall, a cedar masu box fills level, is struck once with a flat paddle that makes a clean toque and becomes exactness. Beside it, bronze weights with smooth cheeks wait like patient judges. The scale's arm settles to true and does not boast about the feat. A money changer turns coppermon with his thumb. So quickly, they sound like rain. When he stops, the counter is dry again, dignity intact. Color gathers without shouting. Indigo cloth cools the eye. Persimmons on a tray deepen to sunset. A row of combs carved from boxwood holds a honey glow, as if they had learned light as a second trade. Senbai crackle on a griddle soy and sugar coaxing brown out of air. A lantern seller hangs paper moons from a pole. Each moon breathes a little when the wind remembers it. A woman with a wheel sharpening rig pedals until a knife learns to be considerate again. Sparks fall like impatient fireflies and then remember themselves as dust. You set a wrapped printha, morning S, key block proof, fawn the cloth in front of a dealer who bought it yesterday with his eyes and needed the night to teach his purse courage. He tests the paper with 2 fingers flat, no rub, only listening. Then he taps the corner teat to hear the block's honesty in the impression. Price walks from mouth to air to nod, coin one way, print the other, both pleased to travel. Gossip moves here like river mistouch and gone, cool on the ears. A daimyo's procession will cross at third bellis, your bundles tight and keep to the posts. Nakamuraza is staging a new play with a fox who forgets he is a fox. Bring a fan for the heat and a friend for the twist. Sumo practice at Econ has a young giant whose bow looks like a gate swinging in a storm. By autumn, he'll be a story. Last night, the moon wore a ring. Good luck for small trades. Leave the big gambles to cranes. You pocket the mist, each rumor folded into its own corner of attention, where it will do no harm and some good. A tea-boy threads the crowd with a tray hung from cords. Cups ring lightly porcelain bells, too modest to call themselves bells. He stops where thirst has the right posture, pours barley tea the color of old straw, and leaves sweetness to those who bought it. A storyteller perches on a sake crate and lets his voice climb 2 steps. then pauses while coins prepare their answer. He sets the scene with 5 words and a tilt of the head. You don't stay for the end. Endings travel well, they will find you. Rules here do not scold, they flow. At a bottleneck, bodies turn sideways and become thinner stories. A porter with a frame keeps the crown of the slope. You keep the shade. At the eel stall, the brush that paints sauce on fish never touches what raw hands touch. The charcoal says SSH in approval. When 2 palms reach for the same lacquered bowl, both withdraw. Laughter becomes the receipt, and the bowl chooses a third hand no one minds. You pause where the Kawarabin news sheets hang damp from their board's woodblock headlines laid out like excited crows. A boy reads yesterday's fire report aloud to a girl who pretends not to listen. She listens. The fire brigade hike she has switched watches with the next district. Ladders will tilt different ways this week, which matters to those who count ladders. A rice price is chalked on a board with the confidence of fresh numbers. The chalk leaves a whisper on the sleeve of the man who wrote it, as if accuracy stained. At the incense shop, the owner opens one drawer, not to a loose wood, shaved like Duskend, lets only scent escape. He catches it again with the lid before greed can assemble a plan. You trade a small coin for a cone of something that will make evening walk softly and tuck it away where your sleeve keeps promises. Across the lane, get a cobbler's, sit like patient surgeons. A strap learns the correct distance from toe to first ambition. A child's foot is measured by laughter and a pinch. A mother pays with coin and a proverb walk light, and the road walks with you. The cobbler keeps the coin and gives the proverb back as change. It will be spent by nightfall and still belong to her. You pass the fishmongers. Silver piles of small bodies take light like a lesson. A knife whispers a long bone and leaves fillets that lie flatter than truth. A crate opens clams that have brought the sound of the tide with them. They say cluck once and you hear the bay. You buy none of it and leave richer. The nose is a generous wallet. A lacquerer examines a chipped bowl and decides to praise its wound with gold. He lays yurushi so thin it seems like intention, not substance. Kintsugi is a rumor about time that turned into a method. You watch long enough to borrow the rumor for your own head. What is broken wants to be taught how to be strong in that shape, not the old one. You keep the market's small courtesies without thinking. The masu returned to its exact angle, the sample fruit touched with eyes, not fingers. The paper parcel accepted with 2 hands, as if it contained not pickles, but a sentence that deserves grammar. When a dispute peaks around a stack of straw bales whose place is this shade, 3 nearby sellers bring their voices down so the argument must, too. A hand on a forearm, an inch offered. The shadow broadens. The quarrel wanders off to buy rice crackers and forgets its name. Near the bridgehead, a procession tests its rehearsal. Drums low as steady hearts, spears like exclamation marks, lacquer that reflects light without blinking. The road learns to be wide. Conversation learns to be quiet. A child bows too deep, nearly becomes a puzzle of limbs. A guard hides a smile because the child's sincerity was brighter than the lacquer. You step back, a half-shoe tray, shoulder to shoulder with a stranger's tray. 2 small altars to everyday food in a ceremony that pretends to be about war. You buy nothing extravagant. A twist of nori to teach rice about sea when the sea is busy. A packet of bonito shavings that smell of polite smoke. 5 apricot kernels sugared to to the polite edge of sweet. Payment becomes small theater. Both hands, both bows, both parties insisting the other is more generous, until the scene releases itself like a paper boat into current. Lost things find their way at a mat under a post, where the keeper looks like he was carved to sit there. A girl describes a hand towel indigo with a misprinted crane, a stain that pretends to be a cloud. The keeper lifts the towel as if conjured. Her gratitude arrives as 3 coins and a story about how the crane was clumsy. He keeps the coins, sets the story on the mat, and it stays there, making everyone lighter who overhears it. When your sleeve's coin thins to the right honesty, you stand in a square piece of shade and inventory your pockets of rumor. The kabuki fox, the sumo gate, the rice chalk, the incense for evening, the price you received and the price you did not pay. The market approves of your accounting by not changing anything important while you do it. On the walk home, a goldfish seller balances glass globes like captured moons. The water inside moves enough to remind you that stillness is a costume. A shamisen tuner plucks and twists, and a note finds the right weather between 2 stalls that sell opposite seasons. 2 apprentices jog past with a plank between them, bowls stacked like nested rainbows. You lean your tray against your chest so theirs will pass without becoming a storm. Back under the arcade, you complete the small errand the room wrote on your palm this morning. A coil of cord for parcels, paper strong enough to carry sweets, if sweets volunteer a narrow brush for numbers, because numbers behave better when their tool is slender. The stationer ties your bundle with a knot that undoes with a confession. You admire it and decide to practice on a slow afternoon. You return by a lane that knows your foot. A sweet potato seller rehearses his winter call, 1 note at a time. The river under the bridge makes the same sentences it always makes, polite currents. Low vowels against stone, a consonant where a pole kisses a boat's ribs. You stand for 1 breath and feel how the city holds together without squeezing. Rules like furniture, prices like weather, gossip like shade. Your door receives you with papers, small white glow. Inside, the hibachi still holds a cautious heart. The kettle remembers what to do. You set the incense cone in its dish knot, yet fire, just promise. The parcel's cord sleeps coiled. The print you sold is out there learning to be looked at. The ones you kept lean in the rack like doorways to the same morning. Ritual here begins, where errands thin and hands remember what to do without witnesses. You lift the norin at the Dorindigo curtain, white glyphsand. The cloth breathes over your knuckles as if to say, go softly. The lane pours you toward the small shrine you pass as often as thirst. Its gate vermilion that keeps its color even in shade frames. A pocket of green and gravel that hushes shoes into manners. A wind bell under the eaves gives 1 silver ting and then thinks better of repeating itself. At the Temizuya stone basin, you take the ladle by its long neck and practice the grammar water prefers. Right hand, left hand, lip, handle rinse, switch, rinse, touch, cleanse. The water is morning cold even now. Your wrists learn attention. A child beside you copies the motions with the careful exaggeration of serious play. His grandmother corrects nothing. The ladle returns to its place as if remembering it on its own. You step onto the gravel and let each crunch become a bead on a string. Before the hall, you bound a performance, a punctuation, and offer a coin. It leaves your fingers with a small toke that vanishes into the dark beyond the rail. You pull the rope once. The bell answers with a low bronze breath that finds your ribs and aligns them. To bows, to claps, a last bow, the old choreography that makes requests small and thanks large. Words, if they come, are short and accurate. Steady hands, patient work, safe crossings, clean endings. To the side hangs a bank of cedar slats, alive with wooden EMA picture plaques, hopes tied with cords. A fox leans into a rice sheaf on one, on another. A hand that can't draw well still manages a boat that looks like a rival. You borrow courage from strangers by reading what they didn't say. Your own wish remains polite and inward. You let it live there, unpinned. Beyond, a rack of fortunes rattles softly. You trade a coin for paper and unfold your weather. Not bad, not best middle luck that trusts you to do your part. You tie the slip to a pine branch where dozens of other maybes flutter like white fish. The knot forgives a tug. You leave it loose enough for the wind to edit. Near the steps, Omamori amulets drowse in a tray brocade sleeves for hope. Travel, trade, home, clear thinking. You finger the one for avoidance of needless heat and smile. Summer has its opinions. You buy none. The sleeve of your robe already keeps a cone of incense for evening, the only protection you planned for today. A priest passes with broom and rake. His sweeping is less about removing and more about reminding gravel where it belongs. The rake's tines sketch waves. The broom erases them with respect. You think of blocks and paper and how patterns are agreements, not commands. At the side altar, a Jizo statue keeps vigil for small sorrows. Someone has wrapped a red bib around his neck, and someone else has set 3 pebbles in a stack at his feet. Start, continue, arrive. You add a 4th and leave it unprovoked. The temple across the lane holds a different quiet. You cross the threshold, one breath lower. Straw sandals line like commas. You leave your geta where wood can rest from road. Inside, incense has done its work already. Smoke threads the beams with discipline and mercy in equal shares. A monk strikes a bowl the sound, leaving in widening rings and then encourages stillness with the gentlest refusal to fill it with words. You sit, knees, consult tatami, spine lengthens, hands nest. A single candle considers the emptiness above it and decides not to reach. Breath makes a square. In, hold, out, rest corners rounder each time. Thoughts try the door. You bow to them without standing. Somewhere, a wooden fishmoke cubs time for someone else's sutra, a spaced toke, 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 that feels like a kind promise to you as well. When the bell returns, it does not end the sitting. It invites the getting up to begin. Back outside, Edo has resumed its polite volume. You carry the temple's shape inside your ribs and let the street learn it from you. At a small stall, the incensaler shows you a sliver of a loose wood, the color of dusk. He holds it to his nose and closes his eyes as if remembering a poem that never required writing. You accept a cheaper cone flavored with sandal and frank intent. He wraps it in paper that smells faintly of storeroom and cedar, and ties it with thread that forgives mistakes. Home receives you with paper light and wood patience. The Kamadana's small Shinto shelf waits near the lintel. You climb 2 steps on a stool that knows your feet and straighten the Ofuda talisman with 2 respectful fingers. A pinch of salt in a dish, 3 grains of rice, a thimble of water in a cup too small to embarrass the gods' offerings, shaped to fit a room and a life. You lift the tiny bell, let it speak once, thrim pure and brief. 2 bows, 2 claps, 1 bow. The house feels taller by exactly the thickness of sincerity. In the interior alcove, the Buddhist Butsudan asks for different courtesy. You light a stick, the matches she a narrow thunder, and touch cinder to incense. The first thread of smoke beads, and then becomes a line. You place the stick upright in ash that remembers every ash. A short sutra, read with the mouth, or with the lips, or with the heart, lands where fatigue was becoming opinion. The rosary Juzu moves once around without needing to know the number. You bow at the end because beginnings deserve bowing too. With the room an inch quieter, you open a roll of paper and grind a thumb of ink. Today you practice Shakyo, tracing a sutra, not to be correct, but to be present. The brush travels, stroke by stroke, over faint characters. Your wrist memorizes humility. The paper accepts both your neat letters and your not-so-neat patience. Both darken to the same black wind. The roll dries. You will leave it at the temple that keeps other people's attempts, a library of efforts that, together, probably amount to success. Tea serves as a bridge between the sacred and the useful. You set the kettle to a thread voice and lay out 3 objects only: bowl, whisk, spoon. Water that pauses just below a boil. Powder that remembers fields and shade. Whisk that persuades air to be flavor. You do not host a ceremony, you host a minute. The foam gathers like a small, obedient cloud. First sip, bitter with a good reason. Second sip, reason turns friendly. You set the bowl so the scene faces away, a courtesy taught by someone long gone who still manages to improve your table. To carry the quiet outward, you open the door and practice uchimizu, a dipper of water over dust. The lane relaxes by the width of a breath. Neighbors' steps fall softer through it. Across the way, a woman bows to her broom, the way you bowed to the bell. The broom replies by making the day walk more gently. A kite above the rooftops pretends to be carp swimming the sky upstream. Its string hums a thin, constant line of attention. You could call that prayer and not be wrong. Evening begins to think about itself. You place the incense cone in its low dish. Fire asks a favor of fragrance, and fragrance agrees to become time. The smoke finds corners the broom cannot, and tidies them. You write a small note and tuck it under the lacquer box. First sip saved for a knock. Return the ladle heavier with shine. Bring the sutra to the temple when hands are free. These are vows the day believes you can keep. From the street comes a distant drum from a neighborhood shrine rehearsing summer 2 slow beats, 1 quick, then silence. A ribbon of children passes with paper lanterns. That haven tea yet learn to be brave in wind. Their laughter hits the wall and returns as smaller laughter. It is enough. On your sill, the cup 4 wings holds its 2 sips. A sparrow arrives precisely the way gratitude does suddenly inevitable. You lower the lamp's wick. The room answers by becoming specific instead of bright. You touch the ofuda once, the juzu once, the scroll in the tokonoma one subjects as inventory, yes, and also as a map of your better intentions. The incense shortens, the cone's ember moving like a patient traveler across a small country. When it goes out, the house will keep the line it drew for longer than smoke remembers. That is the point. Care begins with heat. The sentōs nor an indigo split curtain moves like a slow river when you lift it, and cedar air answers with the smell of clean wood remembering rain. Wooden coins clack in a tray. A bathwoman nods you toward a row of cubbies where sandals become stillness. The dressing room is a hush of folded cloth and soft voices. Beyond, the washing hall open style and timber, buckets nested like shells, low stools lined as if someone arranged patience into a grid. You start with kaku, a ladle over the shoulders, then the back, then knees that have carried more errands than they admit. Water walks your spine as if writing a careful character. A cloth with rice bran lather teaches the skin to be new. Hemp fibers whisper against calves. Shoulders unlearn their habit of pretending to be ears. Around you, the grammar holds. Wash first, soak later. Towels stay out of the tub. Voices keep their sandals on. The big bath weight cedar rim, surface barely shivering under borrowed steam. You lower yourself until heat persuades every stubborn hinge to agree. Hips, wrists, the small hinge behind the heart. Breath stretches into the shape of the room. Long in, longer out, corners rounded by fog. Someone pours hot water over stones. The sound is a soft applause. A boy counts tiles and loses track at 12 because warmth edits arithmetic. You smile without moving your face. Back on the stool you rinse, then pour a bucket down your back that finishes the paragraph. You sit a moment on the cool ledge, where steam turns to pearls on forearms and slides away. A woman wraps a towel around hair that once held pins and promises and now holds only heat. Feet learn the floor again. Cloth meets skin and decides to belong. Outside, care continues in drawers and scales. The Kusaraya apothecary wears the smell of cedar, ink, and roots that remember earth. Tiny labels lean from a wall of chests. Keihi cinnamon bark, for cold that brags shoga ginger, for throats that forget bravery. Cans licorice, to sweeten medicine and manners. Kaken kudzu, for stiff necks. Toki angelica, for blood that needs a thicker. Song shaku yaku peony root, to quiet cramps that tell too many stories. The apothecary listens with fingers on your pulse, not to hunt secrets, only to hear tempo. He weighs with leaf-shaped pans, tips powder into paper, and ties each packet with a thread that forgives clumsy knots. For the chest, when evening grows opinionated, he writes a character you can read with your nose, ginger, and honey, waiting to become shigayu. For the throat, when wind forgets its manners, he hands quince seeds to bloom into a soothing gel. For the belly, when it decides to be dramatic, a salted plum umeboshimi for hot water. A cup that tastes like discipline, becoming comfort. Instructions require more courtesy than precision. Steep, not boil. Sip, not gulp. Rest while it works, so it can pretend to have done everything itself. Next street over, a blind amomissor announces himself with a bamboo clapper. The rhythm is a map you follow with your feet. His mat is clean, his hands are honest. He reads knots like a scholar reads margins notes, where work pressed too hard, where worry wrote in the wrong ink. Palms find the river beside the spine. Thumbs lean until rope remembers it is cloth. The jaw unbuttons, breath relearns a wider door. He finishes with a towel warmed over a kettle. Settles on shoulders like a reasonable verdict. Payment is coins and a proverb. When you walk slowly, the road walks with you. He keeps the coins and returns the words as change. A few doors down, a Seketsubon setter coaxes stubborn joints with bandage and willow bark water. His room smells of camphor and calm. He shows how a strip of cloth, wrapped once more than you think, persuades ankle bones to act like neighbors instead of strangers. You store the lesson in the same pocket as rope knots and door quietening tricks. The barber's chair deals in smaller mercies. Warm cloth over eyes turns the world to red silk. Fingers oil temples with tsubaki camellia that keeps hair obedient and thoughts less so. A razor edits the map of the neck with a whisper you could mistake for rainfall. He offers mimikakia, careful ear cleaning with bamboo spoon and downy puffend. You remember how listening itself can be a remedy. Outside, a wind bell agrees sting once. Exactly. At the Katiguayan Sense Tools Stolva, you cannot afford that poem. You take sandalwood cones instead, intention wrapped in paper that smells faintly of storeroom and cedar. 4 tired eyes, a tea of dried chrysanthemum, 4 hands that split in winter, a pot of mulberry sap, salve, 4 nights that refuse to unclench, a sachet of mugwort yamagi for the pillow, leaves that remind dreams to walk, not run. Neighbors prescribe what drawers don't sell. A grandmother presses roasted salt into a cloth and lays it over the nape where drafts made bad decisions. Another swears by barley tea for afternoons when the sun leans too hard. The tofu man offers okarasoe pult for a poultice that teaches swelling to reconsider. Recipes move at the speed of generosity and carry the authority of kitchens rather than courts. Home receives the day's small medicines like guests. You set packets in their places. Ginger near the kettle, quince seeds in the cool corner, plum in a little dish with its own serious shadow. The kettle clears its throat. You oblige. Shigayu blooms in the cup's team with opinions, sweet taught to behave. First sip warms the tongue, second the throat, third the idea of shoulders. A cough that has been trying to audition for a role it doesn't deserve is told to come back tomorrow. You doubt it will. For the belly, you have kasukudzu starch whisked into hot water until it becomes a shy silk, then honeyed into kindness. It slides down like agreement. You save half for the neighbor who measures weather by her knees. On the sill, your cup 4 wings receives 2 sips of cool. A sparrow drinks and shakes, baptizing the room in dots of approval. Evening suggests fire, so you light the sandalwood cone. Smoke lifts as a thin, competent line and finds corners the broom cannot. You practice 3 needles of sunno metal, only breath. In for the count of 5 grains of rice falling. Hold while a crane would flap once. Out for the distance between 2 posts on Nihonbashi. The room lowers its shoulders to match yours. Hands remember one more old craft. Tiny cones of moxa, pinched from yomogi fluff. You set 3 on a slice of ginger over a point on the calf that every grandmother knows. Touch each with a coal until warmth becomes instruction, not argument heat that stops far short of blister, persuasion that travels under skin like a well-behaved rumor. The scent is field and book at once. You thank whoever taught you, which could be 5 different people and is probably all of them. Dinner is not a prescription, but behaves like one. Rice that remembers water, miso that remembers patience, pickles that remember summer when summer forgets itself. A sheet of nori teaches a mouthful of rice the sea's accent. You dust 1 bowl with a breath of bonito shavings and a wink of yuzu peel. The bowl thanks you by turning cold into story. You pack a small parcel, kudzu, plum, 2 chrysanthemum heads, a note that says, "For the throat that worked too hard today." The apprentice who carried paper like a cloud earlier receives it with both hands and a bow that almost cracks his smile. Small medicine travels better than large pride. Before sleep, you practice the season's gentlest vanity, tooth powder of charcoal and salt, a brush that minds the gum line like a polite guest. You bind hair with a ribbon oiled with camellia, so dreams do not snag on split ends. On the futon, the mugwort sachet makes a green shadow of scent. The ear remembers the Barber-S cloth and decides the world can be red silk again for a while. You lower the lamp. The room arranges its breathing around yours. Somewhere down the lane, a candyman taps 2 sticks together to say aim in a rhythm children hear, even in their sleep. You hear it and do not rise. Sweetness can walk the street without your help tonight. Your hands, warmed by baths and herbs and honest work, lie palm up, as if to air out gratitude. Travel begins with knots. You fold the furoshiki over today's small errands paper slips, a coil of cord, a packet for the bookshop, panned, tie the square with the knot that forgives a tug and resists everything else. The room approves by remembering you with its calm, hibachi heart-banked, kettle lid resting a coin's width ajar, sandals straight as sentences by the door. 1 dipper of uchimizu hushes the dust at the threshold. The lane darkens by a shade and grows 2 degrees more patient. The city offers you its tempo at once. Get a clack, finding the spaces between other people, S-clack. A vendor's bamboo flute testing 2 notes, a wheelbarrow's wooden groan deciding to behave. You turn your body sideways in the narrow where baskets meet, and 2 lives pass without bruising. A haikaku courier darts by with tied messages like swallows at his waist. The bells on his pole announce news without spilling it. You yield a half-step, the sort of courtesy that adds minutes to the day instead of subtracting them. Streets fall toward water in reasonable slopes. At Nihonbashi, the bridge ribs the river like a lacquered spine, and all Japan counts its miles from a post no taller than a man's chest. The market is already awake, but not noisy rice boxers struck level. Scales convinced, tea poured at a height that says practice more than flair. Under the bridge, the Sumida moves with that confident indifference rivers share. Above it, people arrange themselves into a queue that needs no monitoring. Elders near shade children tucked to leeward bundles, kept within the width of their owners' shadows. You wait because waiting is part of traveling, and Edo makes it pleasant. From a stall, steam lifts a thin banner of broth soba that smells of buckwheat and sunrise discipline. The stall-keeper tips the kettle toward your face so you can drink with your nose. You pay him in coin and a rumor about a new play at Nakamura's. He adds a slice of green onion to your rumor and returns it improved. A chestnut roaster turns his drum karakoro and saves the music for winter. The ferry noses in with a bump, soft as a bow. The boatman counts without counting, palm low, then lifts it when the boat is balanced. You step where the plank has learned to be trustworthy, first foot, then breath, then the sense that your weight has made a small promise to wood. The river is the same water as always, and a different skin each hour. Today, a north wind writes small teeth on the surface. The oars write short letters in reply dip, draw, lift, pollet, legible, no flourishes. A heron edits the air with 2 deliberate strokes and shelves itself on a piling like a bookmark. On the water, waiting becomes sideways. A woman steadies a jar with one hand and a sleeping child with the other. A student reads characters from his palm because paper is dangerous in wind. A fishmonger's crate leaks the faint tied syllable of clams that have not finished speaking. Conversation happens at the volume of weather. If a gust stands, the waves tidy for a breath. The boatman shortens his stroke. Everyone else shortens their sentences to match. Agreement is a vessel's secret ballast. Landing at Ryogoku, you step ashore with the quiet kiss of hull to plank still in your ears. The ferry's rope gives that forgiving SHFF through the ring. You give the boatman a coin that smells of other hands and say the small word that means grace and go safely without obliging anyone to answer. Streets on this side take steeper thoughts. Steps bring you up past warehouses that breathe soy and fish in alternating sentences. Past a tea cellar whose kettle never quite stops clearing its throat. At the boathouse, a clerk tests your paper parcels, not and nods. It will survive a second crossing later. You turn toward a shop that keeps ink by the brick and paper by the season. Along the way, you practice the city's rules of passing. Keep the crown of the slope for porters. Lower your voice for doorways. Let a palanquin have both shadow and sun, because its bearers have none to spare. When a daimyo procession rehearses itself down the opposite avenue, drums like steady hearts, spears like exclamation marks you, and everyone else becomes smaller without being belittled. Eyes learn the bravery of looking at sandals. Errands succeed because time agrees to be patient with you. The stationer smiles at the thread you bought yesterday and sells you paper that breathes at the same rate. The brush grinder turns his stone until water remembers to be ink. You say few words. Edo does not require chatter to validate exchange. Objects carry their own introductions. Outside, a kite maker lifts a carp on a string. The fish finds a wind that knows its grammar and swims skyward. You applaud by not stopping. By midday, the bridge has learned another crowd. You wait your share of it under a borrowed Shida shop's overhang that smells of cedar and old rain. A tea-boy threads a tray among hips and bundles, setting down cups by posture rather than request. Here thirst, their patience, their pride, pretending not to be hungry. You accept barley tea, warm as a good idea, and it becomes a small clock in your hand to swallows of time. Then the cup returns to the tray, and the minute is finished. Weather practices mischief in the second hour of Fox's wedding shower. Bright sun with drops like seeds. Cloth umbrellas bloom. Oil paper learning to be head. Those without shelter borrow a doorway and their best posture. You share one side of your umbrella with a stranger, and both of you study the rain as if it were a scroll worth reading aloud. The shower ends exactly when the smell of dust says thank you. Umbrellas close with soft pops like polite applause. You cross back nearer evening by the bridge instead of the ferry wood doing arithmetic with footsteps, plank after plank. A sweet potato man rehearses his winter cry under his breath. It makes you warm to hear it. A boy counts posts and gets lost at the good number 8. His mother lets him. On the last span, a wind off the bay lifts your sleeve just enough to air out your patience and fold it back in neatly. Sometimes travel is waiting shaped like courtesy. The queue at a boza cellar moves in the exact measure his ladle sets down. Up, pour, pause so no one must pretend to be first. Two men meet at a narrow and both turn sideways. Laughter becomes the receipt. At a carpentry lane, a craftsman waits for glue to declare itself ready by the way it threads from a stick. You learn more about time from that thread than from any bell. A procession returns you briefly to stillness. Fire watchers, the hike sheep passing with hooks and ladders, tilted like careful thoughts. People make room without being asked. You lower your head because yesterday's houses taught you to be grateful for today's. When the last ladder tail disappears, conversation rises one thumb width and no more. On the way home, you purchase nothing large. A twist of nori for rice to remember the sea to sugared apricot kernels for the hour when hands stop and thoughts ask for company. A cone of sandalwood to persuade evening to behave. Desire that can wait becomes flavor later. Desire that cannot wait wastes even the good things. Ito has taught you this without once scolding you for learning slowly. Your lane meets you with sounds sized 4 rooms, a pestle counting sesame into paste, a door bolt deciding to be a bolt again, a cat convincing a patch of sun to be warmer. At the threshold, you set the furoshiki down and undo the knot with that gentle confession it prefers. Coins slide into the bowl that keeps coin temper. Paper slips to a shelf where paper does not pick up the room's humidity. The sandalwood cone waits in a dish shaped like a leaf because leaves know what to do with fire. Travel ends as it began, with water. A dipper over the Silahelo. Goodbye. Get rinsed free of the river's breath. Hands clean in the basin that holds a circle of sky. The room receives you exactly as you left it, which feels like being trusted. You tilt the kettle a little closer to speaking and lay the nori beside the rice jar so one can remind the other about tide and sunlight when dinner comes. Your shoulders carry good weight and set it down without argument. Rules in Edo do not press like walls. They sit like furniture, used, steady, easy to lean on, and easier to forget until you need them. The first you meet at your own threshold, get off and placed facing outward for the feet you will become when you leave. The sill stepped over, not on. A dipper of uchimizu to teach dust its manners. Inside, tatami asks for respect without speaking. Avoid the seams, corners align, cushions kept parallel, like friends who never crowd one another. Shoji slides with 2 fingers on the frame. Never a palm on the paper light deserves gentleness. Streets teach grammar by example. In a narrow where baskets meet, bodies turn sideways and become thinner slorus. The porter keeps the crown of the slope. The rest of us borrow shade. On bridges, footsteps choose a modest cadence, so planks can do their arithmetic without complaint. If a courier's bells sparkle behind your shoulder, the road widens by instinct. If a daimyo procession arrives, a paragraph of spears and drums' eyes lower to sandals and voices lower to thoughts. Yielding is not losing, it is punctuation. Measures have names and manners. At the rice stall, the cedar masu box fills to the lip. The paddle strikes once decanned, the grain becomes fairness. At the cloth shop, the shaku stick, polished by 1,000 palms, remembers a true length no mouth can argue with. Prices hang like weather on boards, outside shop's chalk that can be corrected in public view and is, without drama. The market inspector walks as a metronome, not a threat. He lifts a cup, listens for tings, straightens a weight by a thumb width, and leaves each stall better calibrated than he found it. Cues are poems with repeating lines. At the soba stall, bowls arrive in the rhythm the ladle sets. Down, up, pour, pause. At the ferry, elders drift under shade first, while bundles practice staying within the width of their owner's shadows. When a soldier or a midwife appears, the poem rearranges itself kindly and then remembers its original meter. Receipts are laughter and nods more often than paper. Workshops hold soft constitutions. A knife sleeps oiled and wrapped when done. A plane's blade faces inward on the shelf. Chisels lie with edges away from traffic. Borrowed tools live by the door until they walk home heavier with polish than with pride. Inkstones are washed last and least, so the next day will not have to reinvent black from nothing. Apprentices sing counting songs. Low warps remember better than ears do wand. When a task grows loud, the rule is to stop sooner and think longer. Fires are the city's old enemy, so kindness has procedures. Lamps lower their wicks before sleep. Ashes go cold before bins go out. Ladders keep their agreed corners. Door bolts are checked with the soft toque that says present. The night patrol passes with wooden clapperscot, can and lanterns that teach streets to behave without scaring them. If a hibachi banner tilts down an alley, people make room unasked and say little. Gratitude does not need volume. Baths and temples keep their own small agreements. Towels stay outside the tub. Water meets body before body meets water. Ladles return to their rests with their mouths down, so no one drinks another person's heat. At the shrine, 2 bows, 2 claps, 1 bow requests smaller than thanks. At the temple, sandals line like commas. Sutras are read at the volume of breath. Incense sticks burn equidistant, so patience will not feel crowded. Houses are republics of habit. The first sweet sip is saved for whoever knocks with news weather. Safe return, a poem that begged for a listener. The broom leans bristles up when off duty, so work won't wilt. A borrowed ladle lives by the door until it goes home shinier than it arrived. The tray for visitors keeps one corner empty on purpose. Emptiness is appointment, not neglect. Promises hang from a peg only long enough to be remembered. Pegs like being empty by dusk. Disputes are kept small enough to carry. When 2 cellars hint at the same span of shade, 3 neighbors lower their voices until the quarrel must to a hand on a forearm. A basket moved the width of a palm. A proverb offered as change. If coins truly go astray, the keeper at the lost things mat asks for a description exact enough to make truth visible. My sprinted crane, stain shaped like a cloud, and truth arrives as detail. 2 nods complete the judgment. The day continues uninjured. Sound obeys time. After the last bell, music keeps a light hand so sleep can find the houses that invited it. In the morning, vendors rehearse before they sing. The city does not forbid noise. It teaches it to walk on soft feet. Even the river respects the hour. It speaks in low vowels under bridges and remembers consonants only where oars ask politely. Children learn law with games. A string tied low across a garden mouth teaches feet to lift and seedlings to live. A line of smooth stones counts how many went in and how many came out. When numbers match, someone taps the top stone in victory, too shy to wake a nap. Fans never point at faces. Umbrellas drip outside. Paper scraps that could burn become pellets that cannot truel, shaped for small hands and big futures. Weather has procedures. First rain widens doorways, one stranger per lintel. Oil paper opens before opinions. Floors accept a dark ring near the threshold without complaint. In wind, signs come down without sulking. In snow, steps are brushed to the grain and then to the edge, so sandals know where not to slip. The city changes shape the way a courteous host changes chairs. Nothing is scandalized. Everything sits better. None of this is harsh. All of it is steady. You feel the order in your shoulders when a line advances without scolding. In your fingers when the right bowl answers by weight alone. In your feet when a bridge shares shade equally with those who cross. Rules here are not cages, they are chairs, sat upon, moved a hand's width when needed, polished by touch. Evening takes Edo the way a careful hand folds a kimono smooth square, a final palm down the sleeve, so nothing puckers. You walk toward a gate that keeps its vermilion quietly. Beyond it, a garden arranges softness into rule. Lanterns halo themselves in oiled paper. Gravel carries footfalls like secrets. A stone basin sukubai waits under bamboo. Water leans from a spout, fills, tipstock, then begins again. The patient punctuation of wealth. A steward slides a door. Inside, the room declares its calm without raising its voice. Tatami set in a pattern that could teach order to wind. Walls of fusama brushed with pines that never lose needles. A biobu screen where cranes walk in gold leaf, as if daylight had been taught to sick. A low table wears lacquer you could mistake for night, if not for the way it keeps the lamp hole in its reflection. In a row like moons with different opinions about brightness, a koto's string receives a fingertip and answers in a clear line that refuses to hurry. A host lifts the iron kettle from a sunken heartha. Square of charcoal, arranged like a proverb band, listens for its breath. Tea does not begin as flavor here. It begins as posture. Bamboo whisk chasen leans nearby like a good idea. The scoop show shakumajor's powder that looks like ground shade. Bowls wait, thick-lipped, warm in their pottery skins. When whisk meets water, foam gathers into a small green weather that calms the mouth just by being seen. Conversation keeps 2 silk steps. Someone quotes a poet who once compared moonlight to flower on a sleeve. Someone sets a sweet shaped like an autumn leaf near your hand and pretends it arrived by climate rather than kitchen. A screen door slides a thumb's width, and the garden includes itself. The black stripe of a carp where the pond is darkest. A lantern's square cut into a tree trunk. The evening insect that plays one note correctly and then rests. If luxury has a scent, tonight it is sandalwood softened by patience. You do not stay. You bow in the measure the room taught you, and let its polish remain where it belongs. Outside, the lane accepts you back with the practical shine of damp wood. A paper lantern keeps pace at your shoulder, its light a reasonable promise that knows where to stop. In front of a theater, posters paste themselves to air foxes in borrowed faces, heroes in sleeves shaped like arguments, a villain whose eyebrows have studied thunder. You keep the stories for later. You prefer the stage of your own table. On Nihonbashi, last trades find their owners. A fishmonger looks at the river and decides it has given enough. A boy sells the day's final skewer of dango to a man who eats it like news he was waiting for. The bridge remembers every footfall and still invites more. Fire watchers cross with hooks and ladders, shouldered like careful thoughts. People make room without rehearsing. Home meets you with paper's soft glow. The hibachi keeps a thoughtful heart. The kettle greets your hand like a task already half done. You set the sandalwood cone in its dish. Smoke writes a line only a patient reader would notice. On the sill, the cup 4 wings holds its 2 sips. A sparrow arrives on the decision to arrive, drinks and edits the air with a shake. Dinner is a sentence that knows its grammar. Rice that remembers water. Miso that remembers kindness. Pickles that remember summer when your tongue does not. You teach the rice a little sea with a fold of nori. You dust the bowl with a shy weather of bonito and a blink of yuzu. Steam names your face, and your face answers by relaxing. You lift the day's small ledger of promises. The borrowed ladle returned shinier than its errand. The parcel delivered to a threshold that told you a rumor as change. The first sweet sip still saved in case a knock decides to be a story. You hang the rope of tasks on its peg and admire the emptiness that follows. Pegs prefer to sleep unburdened. If you want ceremony, you keep it modest. A thread of water across the hello tomorrow. Goodbye dust. The lamp's wick trimmed until flame practices clarity. The kamadana receives its thimble of water, a pinch of salt, 3 grains of rice. The butsudan receives a single stick of smoke and the first 3 lines of a sutra. You know by heart because a grandmother said it every time she found a lost needle. You touch the paper charm above the beam knot for magic, for manners, for dessert. 2 slices of yolken red beans set to the firmness of resolve share. A plate mended in gold where accident became design. You eat them slow enough that tea can be an equal partner. The whisk lifts a green weather again. Foam hugs the rim like a small moon remembering its tide. First sip, bitter with purpose. Second, purpose turns kind. Night arranges itself outside in a script you can read from bed. Get a scaling down to silence, a last bolt sliding home toka. Breeze deciding which bamboo to persuade the river speaking in vowels under the bridge. Consonants only where an oar politely asks. Someone taps 2 sticks together in a pattern that means candy and. A child answers in sleep by turning over. You fold the futon down to the mat like a decision you already agree with. The pillow smells faintly of camellia. The sachet of mugwort under the case reminds dreams not to run in the house. Hands that planished wood and carried paper and poured water lie palms up, done with verbs. The room keeps its low lamp, the sort of light that lets objects remember their names for morning. You allow yourself one more look at the evening's gilded room, the cranes on gold, the koto's line, the bowl that turned shade into drink, and then you let the picture fold back into its screen. Familiarity is its own luxury, a cup that fits because your hand taught it how. Tatami that forgives footsteps, a door that slides like a thought finding the right word. Comfort speaks many dialects. Tonight you choose the one that ends in sleep. The lamp lowers to a coin. The kettle sighs once, then decides to rest. Smoke finishes its sentence and disappears so the memory of it can work alone. The reed of the noren stops moving. The house has learned your breath and keeps it. It will be the same as yesterday, and that is a comfort.